Hey guys, Eric Tarr here for the ProAudiofiles.com. I got a tip I want to show you about tightening up the bottom end of your mix. We're going to look at what you might think of as a very unlikely place to address this, and that is on your reverb. I hope it makes sense once I show it to you. Here's a track that I'm working on. This is a song called I Want Your Lovin' by the Nashville-based band Trapped on Earth. Definitely a group worth checking out. This song has got a good arrangement from the drums with the bass, electric keys, electric guitar, horns, and vocals. There's a lot to fit together, and for this style of music, kind of jazzy, pop, funk, the bottom end plays such an important role in having a great mix. I don't know about you, but personally, when I'm working on a song, I want the bottom end to sound punchy, fat, tight, full, whatever you want to call it. When a song has it, it's awesome, and when it doesn't, it sucks. So I've tried lots of different techniques over the years to try and get this, from putting high-pass filters and trying to, mid-side processing on the mix bus, and also multi-band compression on the kick and the bass, and all this kind of different techniques to do this. And those are all great. But what dawned on me recently, and it was almost like an epiphany moment, where it was like, how come I'm not paying attention to what's going on in my reverb? I'm spending all my effort looking at the original recorded signals and trying to process those. What I was doing a lot of times was I was kind of rolling off too much of the low end on the dry tracks because I didn't want them to kind of wash out the bottom of my mix. But I noticed, hey, maybe the issue is more what's going on in my reverb. Reverb is great for the high frequencies, the mid-range frequencies, to kind of take something that sounds too dry and give it a little bit of, spaciousness. But the low end, you don't want a lot of spaciousness. That's going to make your low end sound kind of washy. And so what I started doing is looking at processing the reverb separate from the dry tracks. And I noticed, this is making so much more sense now to do it this way, where I can make sure the dry tracks have a bunch of plenty of low-end energy in them, but they're not washing out my reverb. So let's look at how I'm doing it in this track. I've got reverb in a couple different locations. On the lead vocals over here, I bust them over to an auxiliary track, and I've got the Waves Abbey Road plates. Great reverb for adding on vocals. Then over here on my instruments, the electric guitar, keys, and that kind of stuff, I've got the True Stereo Reverb from Softtube. What you'll notice a lot of times on reverb plugins is you have the ability to roll off some of the high frequencies, and that's great so it doesn't sound too harsh or bright or brittle. And so I do that a lot, but you don't always have control on the bottom end. And then also over here on my drums, I have the room mics, so actually recorded reverb of the drum performance rather than having to bust it out and use a plugin. So let me show you what some of these sound like already in isolation. Here's the drum room. Here's the electric guitar and keys going through their reverb. And the vocals.
I lie awake, it must be 3 now.
So what I'm going to try and do now is go back through and remove some of the low frequencies. It's not a complicated thing at all. It's just a matter of finding the right balance. So over here on my drums, I know on my room mics that here I want to have some spaciousness, but not wash out and have the kick drum sound too boomy on the low end. So just adding a simple high-pass filter is really going to clean up that bottom end. And don't hesitate to be, pretty extreme in terms of the processing. I've got a high-pass filter up at like 800 hertz. Now I've got the Q and the slope at 6 dB, so it's pretty gradual on the low frequencies. It doesn't sound too abrupt, but you don't have to worry about, in the case of the room and the reverb sound, don't just roll things off at 200-300 hertz. Go all the way up into the mid-range and start cutting stuff because that's going to ensure that your reverb doesn't wash things out in the 200, 300, 400 hertz important range for getting that tight low-end sound. You've got the direct mics, the kick, snare, all those things. Those are going to be where your punch and your thickness comes from. Same thing on the instruments. Over here, I want my electric guitar to sound thick and full. If I just put this high-pass filter on the dry track, a lot of times what I ended up doing is getting rid of some important frequencies where I might say, okay, I need to roll my electric guitars off at 150 hertz. Well, that kind of made my electric guitar sound too thin. But then if I backed it off maybe down by closer to 100 hertz, 90 hertz, and bust that over to my reverb, well, I need to process the reverb so that the electric guitars don't sound too washed out in the low frequency. So here I've got another high pass filter, 460 hertz in this case, and it's really going to help make sure that bottom, lower mid range doesn't sound too muddy. So here's an example of that. So it's a great way to get some clarity and balance out of the different tracks, but make sure they still have a sound that they're existing in some real acoustic space. Over here on the vocals, even though this is a female vocal track, there's not too much going on already. I've already rolled off stuff below 200 hertz on the vocals because that's not for the female. Not that important of a range, but listen to what happens when I, up here at 750 hertz, roll that off on the reverb. All of a sudden, it makes sure that the vocals aren't muddying up that bottom end.
I lie awake. It must be 3 now. And I try to stay away, but I'm at your door now.
So it's a really simple approach, not complicated processing at all, and every little bit is going to help. Certainly addressing things and making sure that they sound pretty good on the dry tracks by themselves, that's going to be an important part of getting your tight, focused low end, but then additionally processing your reverb just takes it to that extra step. And, those are the differences between having a good mix and having a great mix. So I'll try to over-exaggerate the reverb here in the track and then bypass it A-B back and forth. And you can hear just removing those frequencies from the reverb does help on the track tighten up that low end. So there you go, guys. I'll catch you next time. Take care.